Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving deep into the world of EV charging infrastructure. We got some really interesting research sent to us, actually, about how to make these networks profitable and effective, and we are so excited to dig in.
Yeah, we're going to be your charging station consultants for the next few minutes.
I love it. We've all heard about the need for more charging stations, but this deep dive is all about the placement of them, where to put them for maximum impact so we can ditch range anxiety and embrace the electric future.
Exactly, and this research paper is really showing how it's not just about sticking chargers wherever you can.
Okay, so let's set the scene here. What is the big picture challenge when it comes to EV charging infrastructure?
Well, governments around the world are setting these ambitious goals for EV adoption to combat climate change. Well, that can only happen if we have a robust network of charging stations to support all these electric cars. But building that network, it's not as easy as it sounds. Well, the paper uses the European Union as a case study, and they estimate that they'll need something like 6.8 million public charging points by 2030.
Oh, wow.
And get this, the investment needed is projected to be around 280 billion.
280 billion.
That's a serious commitment, to say the least. So it sounds like we need to be really strategic about where these charging stations are placed. What are the main goals when planning these networks?
Well, there are two key objectives. First, we need to maximize revenue. Charging stations need to make money to stay afloat and attract investors. And this means putting them in places where lots of people will use them, right?
Right.
But the second objective is just as important, and that is we need to maximize the impact. The network has to actually encourage more people to go electric. And that comes back to making charging convenient and accessible. And it's all about tackling that range anxiety that you mentioned earlier.
Right. So we need to strike this balance between profits and accessibility. It can't be all about the money. We need to make EV charging a viable option for everyone. Exactly. But finding that sweet spot is not as simple as it sounds. You might think the busiest roads would be the best place for charging stations, right? But the research actually shows that traffic counts alone don't tell the whole story.
Okay, I'm already sensing that this is going to be more complicated than we thought. So how do we figure out where these charging stations should go? What factors do the researchers consider?
Well, they've been exploring different approaches, and some are definitely more sophisticated than others. One early method relied on what we call static demand proxies.
Okay.
Things like, traffic counts, which we already touched on, and something called demand in isolation.
Demand in isolation. What is that?
So imagine you have a single charging station just kind of in the middle of nowhere.
Okay.
Demand in isolation tries to estimate how many people would use that station if it was the only option available.
Got it.
So like trying to gauge the pure potential demand at a specific location without considering the influence of other charging stations nearby.
Okay, so it's like evaluating a location's charging potential in a vacuum.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Both traffic counts and demand in isolation can be misleading because they don't consider how the charging network is all connected. In reality, a station's popularity isn't just about its location. It's also about what other charging options are nearby and how drivers are making decisions based on that whole network.
Oh, so we need to move beyond these simple metrics then. What are some of the more, advanced approaches researchers are using?
Well, they started experimenting with ideas like the minimum gap approach. This one aimed to avoid redundancy by ensuring a minimum distance between charging stations, kind of spreading them out more strategically.
Interesting.
And there's minimum gap and connectivity, which takes it a step further by requiring new stations to connect to the existing network so drivers can reach them without getting stranded.
Makes sense.
It's like building a roadmap that makes sense for both drivers and the network itself.
Okay, that's starting to sound more like a real-world solution.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling there's an even more sophisticated method out there. Am I right?
You are absolutely on the right track.
Yeah.
The paper introduces a method called route-based network demand.
Okay.
RBND for short.
RBND.
And this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Because instead of using these static proxies, RBND uses simulation to actually calculate the charging demand for different network configurations.
Wow.
Taking into account all of those factors we talked about, route length, vehicle weight, even how drivers behave on the road.
Hold on, how can you possibly simulate all of that? That sounds incredibly complex.
It is computationally intensive.
Okay.
But the researchers came up with some really clever ways to speed up the process,
Okay.
They used techniques to focus the simulation's efforts on the most promising locations.
Oh, so it's like a super-powered planning tool that can actually handle the real-world intricacies of EV charging.
Exactly. And the best part is this isn't just theoretical.
Right.
The paper actually tested RBND against those other methods we talked about.
Okay, drum roll, please.
Yeah.
How did it perform?
The results were really impressive. RBND consistently outperformed the simpler methods, especially when electric vehicles were starting their journey with a low charge.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you're setting off on a long trip with a low battery, the placement of those charging stations becomes absolutely crucial. You need to know you can reach the next one before you run out of juice.
Exactly. RBND excels in those situations, because it anticipates those needs and optimizes the network accordingly.
So it's like it can see into the future of EV driving and plan for a world where range anxiety is a thing of the past.
Yeah.
This is all incredibly interesting. So we've got this powerful tool that can help us place charging stations where they'll be most effective, but the EV world is constantly evolving. How do we make sure these networks can adapt to those changes?
That's an excellent question. It brings us to the next crucial aspect of this research, which is planning for the future. We need to make sure these networks are resilient and can handle things like improvements in battery technology, faster charging speeds, even shifts in driver behavior.
So it's not just about finding the best spots today. We need to be thinking long term.
Exactly. And that's what we'll delve into next. It's kind of like, when you're building a house.
Okay.
You don't just want it to, stand today.
Right.
You want it to be able to withstand anything that comes at it in the future.
So how do we future-proof these charging networks? Where do we even begin?
Well, the researchers took this really clever approach. They did what's called a sensitivity analysis, basically looking at how the optimal locations for those charging stations change when they, tweaked certain factors.
Okay, so what kind of factors did they tweak? Give us some examples.
Imagine you have this crystal ball.
Yeah.
Right? And you can see different versions of the future.
Okay.
So they played around with things like battery size.
Mm-hmm.
What if, all of a sudden EVs have much larger batteries and they can travel a lot farther on a single charge?
Okay.
How does that impact where we need the charging stations?
That's a great analogy. It's like planning for all these different possibilities, right?
Exactly. They also looked at charging power. What if charging speeds get so fast that it only takes a few minutes to fully charge your car? How does that change things? And even considered driver behavior, What if people start taking longer trips because they're more comfortable with the EVs? All of these things can influence where those charging stations should be.
So they ran these simulations, changing these factors one by one, and then looked at how those ideal locations shifted.
Exactly. And what they found was actually really fascinating.
Okay.
Despite all of the variations, some locations just kept showing up as winners. They call these Rockstar locations.
The Rockstar locations, I love that. What makes them so special? Why do they keep popping up, no matter what the future looks like?
Think about it this way. Some locations, whether it's their geography or proximity to transportation hubs, or even just the natural flow of traffic, are just destined to be EV charging hotspots. They're like prime real estate,
Okay.
And identifying those early on can be really valuable for planners and investors.
It's like having a cheat sheet for the future of EV charging, right? If we know where these Rockstar locations are, we can just focus our efforts on those spots first.
Exactly. It takes away a lot of the guesswork and it allows for, more targeted development of the whole network.
This is starting to feel very real world. Can you give us a concrete example of how this might actually play out?
Yeah, absolutely. The researchers used the Swedish road network as a case study. They created what's called a density map, showing how often these Rockstar locations popped up in all those different future scenarios.
Okay, so we're zooming in on Sweden. What does this density map tell us about the future of EV charging over there?
Imagine you're looking at this map of Sweden, and you see these clusters of high-frequency locations starting to emerge, right? Some are along those major highways, others near, transportation hubs like airports and train stations.
Yeah.
And some are even in those more rural areas, maybe near, tourist destinations.
Oh, interesting.
Or along those scenic routes. These are the spots where EV charging in Sweden is likely to be concentrated.
So it's like they've created this treasure map, right? For anyone looking to, invest in EV charging infrastructure.
That's a great way to put it.
They know exactly where to focus.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that this approach can be applied to any region. It's a framework for understanding how this all works and how we can plan for a future where, EVs are just the norm.
So it's not just about Sweden. This research has like global implications.
Yeah.
We can use this to plan for the future of EV charging anywhere.
Exactly. It's about taking a data-driven approach and making smart decisions
Right.
that'll benefit, drivers and the planet as a whole.
So we've talked about the challenges, the approaches, and the importance of planning ahead. But what does all of this mean for the person who's like actually thinking about buying an EV?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
So we've gone through a lot from, just how big this challenge is to the, really complex algorithms researchers are using to figure all of this out. But let's make this real for a second. Like, what does all this actually mean for the person out there thinking about going electric?
Well, I think it's a really exciting time to be thinking about an EV
Okay.
because this research is showing that there are a lot of smart people really putting a lot of effort into making sure we have the charging infrastructure we need.
So are you saying like the days of worrying about running out of power on a road trip are over?
Exactly. As those Rockstar locations are identified, EV charging will become less of a barrier and more just a part of life.
Right.
It'll be like finding a gas station. You don't even have to think about it.
That's a great point. I mean, we take that for granted, right?
Right.
But for EVs to be mainstream, we need that same level of confidence.
Absolutely. And that's what this research is doing.
Okay.
It's not just about making it possible to charge, but making it so easy you don't even have to think about it.
So what's the big takeaway for our listeners, thinking about going electric?
I think the key message is that the future of EV charging is looking really good. We're moving beyond those early challenges into a phase where charging infrastructure is getting a lot more sophisticated,
Okay.
more attuned to, what drivers need.
So if someone is worried about range anxiety or just not being able to find a charger,
Things are changing really fast
got it.
and in a good way.
It's like we're about to enter this whole new world of transportation where charging your car is just like filling up with gas today.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
And this research gives us that roadmap to get there, showing how with some planning and smart solutions, we can build a network that works.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive, I gotta say. I went from feeling kind of overwhelmed to actually feeling optimistic.
It's been a pleasure talking about this with you.
Yeah, always great to see how research like this is shaping the future.
For sure.
Now, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the future of EV charging? Have you seen those Rockstar locations popping up near you? Tell us about it. Head over to our website or find us on social media. Until next time, happy charging.